Scarlett Johansson is suing Disney. In a grievance between the A-list actress and the mouse monopoly, Scarlett Johansson lawyered up due to how Marvel Studios' Black Widow, a movie that ScarJo both produced and stars in, was simultaneously released in theaters and on the streaming service Disney Plus for a premium $30 fee amid the current COVID-19 pandemic. This is a problem because Johansson's contract gives her a certain percentage of the film's box office profits, but the Disney Plus release cuts into her potential monetary gains, ensuring that Johansson receives far less money than what she otherwise would have gained. The lawsuit further states that there was a mutual understanding that the movie would release in theaters exclusively. After all, Johansson's contract for the movie was done in 2017, which was 2 years before Disney Plus was even announced. In other words, streaming was not negotiated in the contract. It was not part of the regimen. The lawsuit states how Disney Plus dug into Johansson's potential earnings. To quote, Disney knew that the cannibalization of box office earnings by Disney Plus would save Marvel, and by extension Disney, very large amounts of money that it would otherwise owe Miss Johansson. On information and belief, Disney intentionally induced Marvel's breach of the agreement without justification in order to prevent Miss Johansson from realizing the full benefit of her bargain with Marvel. End quote. The lawsuit then further details that theatrical releases are meant to be exclusive. To quote, as Miss Johansson, Disney, Marvel, and most everyone else in Hollywood knows, a theatrical release is a release that is exclusive to movie theaters. Disney was well aware of this promise, but nonetheless directed Marvel to violate its pledge and instead released the picture on the Disney Plus streaming service the very same day it was released in movie theaters. End quote. Johansson has every right to be pissed. While it is easy to categorize her as a privileged millionaire, Johansson was undoubtedly screwed over by Disney. According to the Wall Street Journal, Johansson is losing up to $50 million due to Disney's decision to release Marvel Studios' Black Widow on streaming, which is truly a significant amount. And even though I personally believe that some of that money deserves to go to lower paid workers who worked on the movie, it does not change the fact that Disney violated its agreement with Scarlett Johansson, that it shortchanged an A-list actress. This is important to note given that Disney is one of the wealthiest companies on Earth. The company rakes in billions of dollars every year. They make enough money to make Disney World rain in cash if they wanted to, and the company can easily afford to pay their actors what they are due. But in this instance, the company forwent its contractual obligation and kept the money for itself. For lack of a better term, Disney got greedy. This is hardly the first time Disney fucked over someone else's contract either. During the release of Aladdin, i.e. the 90s cartoon, not the more recent live-action remake, Disney breached their contract with Robin Williams when they overly merchandised his iconic character of the genie and made him and his performance the big selling point, which was also against the contract. And in as recent as the year 2020, Disney has been under fire for withholding royalty payments to authors like Alan Dean Foster, who did novelization adaptations of Star Wars and Alien. In terms of Alan Dean Foster, these instances of Disney foregoing contractual obligation garnered an online shitstorm under the trending hashtag #DisneyMustPay, though some of these breaches were resolved amicably. Furthermore, several other actors and actresses are contemplating their next move. Emma Stone, who starred in her own Disney-backed Cruella feature, which also simultaneously released in theaters and on Disney Plus, is reportedly thinking about suing Disney as well. And many in Hollywood are both on Emma Stone's and Scarlett Johansson's side. They are sympathetic. This Hollywood fanfare supporting Johansson makes sense when considering the rise of streaming and subscription services. For a long time, Hollywood contracts were made to detail bonuses that were tied to box office performance, but the advent of streaming has thrown a wrench into the proceedings. Streaming platforms generally don't make their numbers public, meaning that it is hard for anyone to gauge what movie qualifies as a success or a failure, which is especially problematic for actors, actresses, and other high-profile industry creatives negotiating payment on their respective contracts. This became abundantly clear with Warner Bros. And the HBO Max controversy last year. Warner Bros. Announced back in 2020 that their whole 2021 slate of movies would release in theaters and on the streaming service HBO Max simultaneously, which was admittedly neat for the end consumer, but far less great for creatives with contracts that prize box office returns rather than streaming. It caused an industry-wide industry-wide uproar, where even Warner Brothers stalwarts like Christopher Nolan, who has exclusively made movies for the company for almost 20 years, eviscerated the company's decision via The Hollywood Reporter. To quote, "Some of our industry's biggest filmmakers and most important movie stars went to bed the night before thinking they were working for the greatest movie studio and woke up to find out that they were working for the worst streaming service." End quote. Of course, payment in the streaming age is a new problem that needs to be dealt with, though admittedly some streaming-focused platforms like Netflix and Apple TV have thought somewhat ahead. While it is difficult to determine how a movie performs on a streaming service when that said streaming service doesn't share its info and metrics, Netflix's and Apple TV's contracts are more clear-cut. According to an article by The Verge that spoke to an unnamed source, quote, "Actors and producers working with a streamer like Netflix are typically paid a set fee. If they are lucky enough to have significant leverage, they could also potentially secure a bonus premium fee that's a contractual dollar amount paid out over months or quarters. But it is not performance-based like box office bonuses are. Netflix often pays out this pre-negotiated sum in 8 quarterly installments following a title's release, while Apple tends to pay out a little quicker over 12 months. End quote. But even with that said, this still is not good enough. Regardless of the streaming service, the definition of success is not universal or clear-cut. According to SVP of Content Strategy and Editorial Director at Box Office Pro, Daniel Loria, the definition needs to be hammered out. To quote, "I think we have to understand Scarlett Johansson's lawsuit in the context of the redefined success metrics for any movie in the market today. Unfortunately, we are all in the dark as to what that success means in the streaming era, not just the COVID era, but the streaming as a whole. If the industry wants to redefine the metrics of success for a movie, it needs to be on the same page on what that definition is. And it seems right now like every studio is playing by a different set of rules and different metrics on what is financially successful and what is not." End quote. This is an industry-wide problem, especially for creatives working with studios and platform holders that place a heavier emphasis on theatrical distribution. With the Warner Bros. HBO Max clusterfuck, a lot of Hollywood talent was put on the wayside amid plans to distribute movies amid the pandemic. But there is at least one silver lining. Warner Bros. Actually reworked various contracts to incorporate streaming into account, and while the new contracts have come with some criticisms, it is an improvement. Unfortunately, though, the same sadly cannot be said over Disney's bungling of Black Widow and other movies that premiered on Disney Plus's Premier Access. In terms of Scarlett Johansson, Disney clearly could have altered her contract to take streaming into account. In fact, there was an initial plan to do this. In 2019, Marvel's chief counsel David Galuzzi wrote to Johansson's representatives informing them that they would alter the contract if distribution methods were changed. To quote, "We understand that should the plan change, we would need to discuss this with you and come to an understanding, as the deal is based on a series of very large box office bonuses." End quote. But Disney never followed through. Even though Disney Plus did not exist at the time when Johansson's contract was first written, the company allegedly ignored Johansson and her team when she reached out regarding the potential to restructure her contract to reflect the new modern reality where Disney Plus and COVID-19 exist hand in hand. Which is ominous, but hey, what do you expect from Disney? Screwing people over for cash is how the mouse gets his jollies off after all. Furthermore, the company responded to Scarlett Johansson's lawsuit with a vindictive denial that would make any corpo proud. To quote, "There is no merit whatsoever to this filing. The lawsuit is especially sad and distressing in its callous disregard for the horrific and prolonged global effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Disney has fully complied with Ms. Johansson's contract, and furthermore, the release of Black Widow on Disney Plus with Premier Access has significantly enhanced her ability to earn additional compensation on top of the $20 million she has received to date." End quote. To be blunt, this Disney response was very underwhelming. In fact, if you think the response sounded condescending, you are not alone. Screen Actors Guild President Gabrielle Carteris fired back with a blistering response. Per her statement, Disney should be ashamed of themselves for resorting to tired tactics of gender shaming and bullying. Actors must be compensated for their work according to their contracts. Scarlett Johansson is a shining white-hot spotlight on the improper shifts in compensation that companies are attempting to slip by supply talent as distribution models change. Nobody in any field of work should fall victim to surprise reductions in expected compensation. It is unreasonable and unjust. Disney and other content companies are doing very well and can certainly live up to their obligations to compensate the performers whose art and artistry are responsible for the corporation's profits. Additionally, we are deeply concerned by the gendered tone of Disney's criticism of Ms. Johansson. Women are not callous when they stand up and fight for fair pay. They are leaders and champions for economic justice. Women have been victimized by pay inequity for decades, and they have been further victimized by comments like those in Disney's press statements. These sorts of attacks have no place in our society, and the SAG will continue to defend our members from all forms of bias." End quote. This form of gender discrimination is especially galling when considering Black Widow's story. The movie is a feminist actioner through and through and focuses on strong, capable women trying to take down a misogynistic man and his sexist organization. It is a very female-centric movie, yet Disney shortchanging the lead actress of its feminist movie is beyond parody. After all, how can the movie's female empowerment themes feel authentic when its own studio disenfranchised the film's lead star? It just does not scream girl power to me. Admittedly and sadly, there is not much of a resolution here yet. Who knows who will end up winning this lawsuit or how much the industry will change the structure of its contracts in regards to streaming. There's still a lot of variables to have to play out. But make no mistake, Disney's treatment of Scarlett Johansson has put the industry on notice. After all, she is a top-tier talent, a true A-lister, and if Disney is willing to pull this stunt on her, who knows what the company is willing to do to everyone else. Alright, so that was another video. Just want to give a special thanks to my patrons, especially my high tier ones, and David Devlin and Mom. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.